along with many other Australians.
Senator Singh.
I rise to speak on the Narcotics Drug Amendment Bill 2016 and gladly in support of this bill, as Labor is supporting this bill that makes a medicinal cannabis licensing scheme legal in Australia. A number of Labor members and senators and other senators in this place have been pushing for changes to this law for some time. The Commonwealth Parliament, through this bill, is playing very much its part in helping to ensure that families will no longer have to access medicinal cannabis products illegally or on the black market, and to ensure we have a regulated licensing scheme in Australia. Now, why? Because I've learnt, and so many of us have learnt, from families, from sufferers, from people in pain, of their personal stories, their stories of pain and of relief. Relief from this medicinal cannabis providing that relief. So why are we doing this bill? Because families should no longer have to find themselves caught between the risk of criminal action on one hand and using an unreliable supply on the other, all the while knowing that their loved ones will suffer if something does not change. So I rise today in the hope that in the coming months, states and territories in Australia will work together to ensure that medicinal cannabis is legal, is safe and available to those in need. Because in passing this bill, we are doing our part at the federal level, but we also need the states to do theirs to make medicinal cannabis available to those families who need it most. This bill, of course, is, though, a very first critical step that we will enable medicinal cannabis to be produced in this country. Primarily, it amends the Narcotics Drug Act to permit the licensing of growers of medicinal cannabis in Australia, provides fit and proper person tests to be applied to licences by the Department of Health. We know there is broad public support for making cannabis products available for medicinal purposes in Australia. There's been survey after survey, poll after poll that has proved that. But there's also been broad public support for having a regulatory system which ensures that Australian medicines are safe. And I do note the AMA had previously called for a coordinated approach to medicinal cannabis and raised their concerns about previous bills. But the experience of watching a loved one suffer is soul-destroying. We feel their pain, their exhaustion, and the fact that they are often powerless to help. After listening to the overwhelming evidence during the Senate inquiry that I participated in last year with Senator Di Natale, Senator Ian MacDonald, Senator Urquhart, after hearing all of that evidence, overwhelming evidence and personal stories from families, it was clear that legislation was needed, and so our laws do need to change. Our current law does not reflect the reality that medicinal cannabis is already being used successfully as a form of pain relief and a means to control diseases such as epilepsy. Nor is medicinal cannabis a new or controversial treatment. Indeed, until the 1970s even, it was available in Australia. And evidence suggests that medicinal properties were well recognised in ancient China, where physicians recommended it for the relief of constipation, gout, malaria, loss of appetite, as well as in aid to childbirth. Cannabis was widely used for a variety of ailments such as muscle spasms, menstrual cramps, rheumatism, convulsions, rabies, epilepsy. It was also used to promote uterine contractions in childbirth and as a sedative to induce sleep. So it has a long history and should not be controversial. As well, we can look internationally at other jurisdictions that have recognised the benefits of medicinal cannabis. Israel has a medicinal cannabis scheme under which medicinal cannabis is supplied to patients who are approved by the Israeli Ministry of Health through licensed growers in Israel who cultivate cannabis plants on a not-for-profit basis. Health Canada has granted access to cannabis for medicinal purposes to Canadians who have had their support of their physicians. And again, in the Netherlands, the government has licensed growers to produce standardised cannabis which would be prescribed to doctors and dispensed by pharmacists. So, of course, we can learn from other countries and how they've administered medicinal cannabis. But as I said, this community support is so significant in Australia for the medicinal use of cannabis that this has to happen sooner than later. The 2013 National Drug Strategy Household Survey by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare found that around 70% of respondents supported a change in legislation permitting the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes. And 74% of respondents were in favour of clinical trials into medicinal cannabis. Over the last 18 months, I've been incredibly touched by the stories of patients using medicinal cannabis and also to learn of their families who support those suffering. They are the human faces of devastating diseases and for a variety of reasons have found conventional medicines have not worked for them. Daniel Haslam is one of those individuals. Dan was a courageous young man who advocated fearlessly for the use of medicinal cannabis right up until his death. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer at just 20 years of age. He dedicated himself to promoting a cause he believed could bring some relief to people suffering from painful, life-threatening diseases such as he was. In doing so, he advocated that conventions have not kept pace with scientific progress. And Lucy Haslam, Dan's mum, presented compelling evidence to the Senate inquiry into medicinal cannabis last year. She said, and I quote, "I've spoken to cancer patients and I've spoken to people with MS who were ready to commit suicide but are now looking to go back to work." Lucy Haslam, your tireless work has helped us get to this point today. We owe you a great debt and gratitude for all of your advocacy, for your family, for Dan, for everyone in the community, and you have touched the lives of so many, including so many of us here, that has helped us get to this point. And in my own home state, in Tasmania, Nicole Cowles has also been an inspiring advocate on behalf of her daughter Alice, who suffers from extreme seizures. Nicole has testified to the significant improvement in Alice's condition after beginning treatment with medicinal cannabis. Her story joins many I have heard in Tasmania, grandmas with severe back pain who no longer need conventional painkillers, mothers with substantial shakes who have been able to reinvigorate their lives, pain, seizures, shakes, cancer patients, depression. I've sat with these people as they've told me their stories, their remarkable stories, some brought back from the edge, who have then been able to live again because of the benefits of medicinal cannabis. And in listening to their stories, it reminded me of the pain and the suffering that my godmother, who had rheumatoid arthritis, suffered with for so many years, passed away a couple of years ago now, and what relief she may have found if medicinal cannabis had been available to her. In meeting mothers, fathers, sons, daughters who are risking their livelihoods and freedom to secure safe, consistent tinctures to alleviate the pain or symptoms of their loved ones, I thought to myself, I would do the same. But part of the risk with medicinal cannabis has been sourcing reliable medicine. Tinctures can vary in quality and efficacy, with the added risk of dodgy dealers taking advantage of vulnerable individuals. Then there are the white knights who have worked tirelessly to produce and give quality tinctures to patients. Their courage and advocacy I commend. And because of their work, I can stand here today, hopefully, in the hope of a nationally consistent scheme bringing numerous benefits to both patients and the community. It is critical for those suffering, for those patients, to be able to talk freely and openly with their medicinal practitioners about the benefits of this treatment. It also gives doctors further options for treatment in cases where conventional medicines have failed to work. This is highly beneficial not only for patients currently using medicinal cannabis, but also for future patients, for people who may be having cancer chemotherapy, suffering HIV-related illness, multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury, epilepsy, diabetes, Alzheimer's, inflammatory bowel disease. The list goes on and on and on to the benefits that medicinal cannabis can provide to those suffering disease and pain. So this bill, the Narcotics Drug Amendment Bill 2016, will bring additional benefits with the national licensing scheme creating two classes of licence, medicine and research. The creation of the research licence will enable further research and clinical trials, such as in New South Wales, which is co-sponsored by Victoria and Queensland. And clinical evidence will help solidify the significant anecdotal evidence which supports the benefits of medicinal cannabis. With the importation of plants and seeds into Australia, the opportunity to refine and understand the different strains and their properties will be provided. And our understanding of the benefits of medicinal cannabis for a variety of ailments will be furthered, and that is so important. But coupled with the national scheme for cultivation for medicinal purposes, we will be giving this industry the best chance of creating effective, consistent medication. So the legislation introduced will decriminalise the manufacturing of medicinal cannabis, but has also the potential to create an inconsistency with state and territory laws. And therefore state and territories each have differing criminal laws around the possession and the use of cannabis, and that is where they need to come to the party and change their laws. Currently, the use, possession, supply and trafficking of cannabis is prohibited in all states and territories prescribed by the State Crimes Acts and Codes and Poisons Acts in those various states. So it is clear that regardless of us passing this law today, that it is only the first step and still does not provide the treatment needed for those suffering pain in our communities. So I do urge the Minister, after this part of the puzzle is passed, to take that up to those states and territories to get them on board. I certainly will do so in my own home state. I think there has been, in the last year in this place, a higher level of leadership from a number of MPs and senators on medicinal cannabis, and that national leadership is needed. A patchwork of access arrangements cannot emerge across different states and territories. That is the whole point of having a federally legislated approach. We need a uniform system of laws, both medical as well as criminal, in relation to access to this drug. We also need a uniform clinical guidelines to be developed, guidance on what products are produced, and national leadership to deal with problems as they arise. Australia already has a vast experience in managing controlled substances, such as growing poppies for the purpose of producing opiate-based medicines. And we also have the benefit and example of experience from our own overseas partners, which I alluded to earlier. Growers' licences must be connected to the supply chain, meaning a grower will need to have an arrangement in place with a manufacturer in order to get a licence. Permits will be issued to control the amount of cannabis that is produced, and the system will ensure that the oversupply of cannabis does not occur. The objective, of course, is to ensure that we do not have stockpiles of cannabis being produced and then ending up in unlawful purposes. Similarly, a manufacturer must be able to demonstrate their connection to the supply chain, dispensing to that patient so that it's consistent with the Therapeutic Goods Act. We need the Commonwealth and the states and territories working together because they all have a role to play in ensuring each aspect of the manufacture, use and possession of medicinal cannabis is legal. Having said all of that, of course medicinal cannabis is not a silver bullet to all the ailments that people suffer, but it is definitely potentially a source to alleviate pain. I've listened to so many stories from so many family members that have shared the incredible turnaround that their loved ones have experienced from the simple application of a tincture of medicinal cannabis each day. It is time for Australia to follow suit of other nations and provide this alternative treatment legally to help alleviate the suffering of our loved ones. I would like, in closing, to acknowledge some of the support that has already taken place by other leaders in our community in other states and territories. One particular is from the former Premier in Tasmania, Lara Giddings, who has tirelessly been campaigning for medicinal cannabis at the Tasmanian level. She, like me, has seen the benefits that it has provided to so many suffering in pain. I don't want all of that advocacy and leadership that has been on display by so many in those states and territories, particularly Lara, to go in vain if we don't complete the puzzle that is needed to provide a federal legislated scheme. And that is why it is so important that this bill is passed, but that the state and territories then do their role. Finally, in the words of Lucy Haslam, every time somebody dies in pain, that is a travesty that should not be happening. We can do something about this. Lucy, we are here with you, trying so hard to do something about this and make medicinal cannabis available in Australia as soon as possible, so that so many people suffering no longer have to take this illegally, can have it provided to them by a practitioner, and it can be another source of medicine that's available in our community, because we already know the benefits that it provides and that we need it so much to be provided.